Okay, so here we go. AP US Government and Politics Review Part 3. This is linkage institutions, which since I went over the slide that quickly, it probably cut off. This, of course, was done by another fellow, Steve Miller, from Walter Johnson High. If he contacts me, I will take these down. Political parties, interest groups, and mass media. So this is the part of the AP Government exam that deals with linkage institutions, mechanisms that facilitate the communication of interests and preferences by like-minded citizens. That's academic keys. For it links what you want, it lets the government know what you want, and it lets you know what the government's going to do, the linkage institutions. 10 to 20% of the test is over this stuff. So I usually just go in the middle and think roughly 15% of the test. Political parties and elections include their functions, organization, historical development, and effects on the political process. Interest groups, including political action committees, the range of interests that are or are not represented, the activities of interest groups, the effects of interest groups on the political process, the unique characteristics and roles of PACs or PACs in the political process, and the mass media, the functions and structures of the media, the impact of media on politics. Here we go, political parties and elections. Where do political parties exist? They exist as a label in your mind. Some of you have decided you are in a political party. You did not have to sign up for that to decide that. You can say you're a member. Even if you're not registered, you can say you're a member. You can label yourself. You'll find if you start talking about your politics with other people, they're going to label you anyway. Sometimes they're going to mess up. Of course, a lot of times they'll label you a liberal if you're more liberal than they are. Even if you're conservative, if they're extremely conservative, they'll still consider you a liberal. Or they'll call you a conservative if they're extremely liberal and you're moderate, you know, that kind of thing. So be prepared to be annoyed when you talk politics with other people. As an organization, recruiting and campaigning for candidates. Political parties exist as an organization, recruiting and campaigning for candidates. Political parties exist as a set of leaders organizing and trying to control legislative and executive branches. An important thing about political parties is they're trying to win elections. The thing that makes a big difference between a political party and an interest group is a political party is trying to get a member of the political party to win the election. An interest group is really only interested in the policy side of it. They don't care who wins as long as that person who wins supports their policy issue. So they will support either a Democrat or a Republican, possibly a third-party person, if they view that person as friendly to their issue. U.S. parties have become weaker in all three arenas, as a label, as an organization for recruiting and campaigning candidates, and as a set of leaders trying to control government, but they still serve to link the voters to the political process, so that makes them a linkage institution. So how U.S. political parties differ from those of other Western nations. There's less control over nominations in our system. We have primary elections. There's less control over campaigns. Candidates can get funds independently. Less control of elected members as a result of the other two. Bottom line is if you say you're in a party, you're in the party, you can register in the party and you can run. And even if party leadership doesn't like you because it's an election, they don't really have control over the situation. They can request members of the party not vote for you, but members of the party can ignore that request. So therefore, individuals in the party have a lot of control over whether they run and win an election, unlike in most of Western Europe. Three major causes of these differences: decentralization of the federal system, regulation of parties by state and federal laws, separation of legislative and executive powers. So the National Party doesn't have control of the state parties. So you really have 51 parties in a sense. Regulation of parties by state and federal laws. They remove some of the power that political party leadership could have, because we believe in a kind of democracy that includes democracy within the party system as well. And separation of legislative and executive powers. In most Western European countries, you have a parliamentary system where you elect a slate of legislators for an area, and the number that your party gets is based on the number of people in that area who vote for them. And what that means is, because of that system, that creates a situation where you have a coalition government build, and then they appoint the executive out of the legislative, so that the prime minister in a parliamentary system is a member of the parliament or the legislature or what have you, and they form a government out of the legislature. And this is something a lot of people don't seem to understand. In a parliamentary system, the executive branch is formed from the legislative branch. And what does that mean? That means, because of the nature of how this works, parties are very strong, because parties have a lot of control over which member of their party could be the prime minister. That kind of thing. History of political parties. The founding, 1789 to 1820. Parties were created and constituted loose caucuses of political notables in various localities, with New England strongly Federalist, followers of Alexander Hamilton, and much of the South Republican or Democratic Republican, followers of Jefferson. Political participation was limited, and nominations for most local offices were arranged rather casually. A lot of times they were self-announced. Oh, by the way, I'm running. After several other rich guys got together and talked to the guy who decided to run, and they decided, we think you'd be best for this area. The Jacksonian period, 1824 to Civil War. The party convention was invented. It was designed to replace the caucus, which is composed of members of Congress. And it was designed and invented to nominate presidential candidates. It was supposed to be more democratic, which is interesting because later on the primary system was designed to get around what they considered convention bosses who were manipulating who became candidates. The two-party system emerged. Political participation became a mass phenomenon with parties built from the bottom up. And one of the reasons for this was very simple, which is the franchise, the right to vote, was expanded during this time period. So in the early 1800s, it moved from being propertied white males to white males. So white males who didn't have property, by the time of Andrew Jackson's ascendance, his rise, they could vote, even though they didn't own land and things like that. So it's part of the democratization of America. We go from well-to-do white males to all white males to, we go through the Civil War and in theory all males, even though we know because of Jim Crow laws, segregation, things like that, it wasn't really the way it worked. And then we have women. And then eventually we get back around to actually enforcing what we said about all males, but now all males and women, and try to get rid of racial discrimination. Civil War and Sectionalism, the 1930s, from the Civil War to the 1930s. Comprehensive organizational form and appeal developed for the parties. Both parties tried to straddle the slavery issue. Republicans dominated nationally, but competition at local level. Both parties split into two factions, stalwarts and progressives. The era of reform, New Deal to the present. And I really would probably break that up from New Deal to about 1968 or so, and then 1968 to the present. But reforms were designed to reduce political corruption, but they also weakened the parties. The use of primaries to replace nominating conventions became common, and they favored nonpartisan elections at local levels. Strict voter registration, and that was designed to keep people from stuffing ballot boxes, which there was a history of back 100 years ago. That's where one guy would go to one voting site, say he was this guy, vote there, then he'd go to the next voting booth and say he was this other guy and vote there. He'd go to polling places all over. And then he would have little tokens to show he voted and so on, and he would get paid. Civil service reform to eliminate patronage. But of course, that happened in 1882, right? Pendleton Act and all that. Mm-hmm. National party structure today. Parties are similar on paper. They have a national convention that has ultimate power. It meets every 4 years. The National Committee is composed of delegates from the states, and they manage the party between conventions. Congressional campaign committees support parties' congressional candidates, try to help get members elected in Congress, and the national chair manages the daily work. Why is it every 4 years? Because we have a presidential election every 4 years. Party structures diverged or became more different in the 60s and 70s. The Republican National Committee became more bureaucratic. The Democratic National Committee became more factionalized. In the national conventions, the selection of delegates is different. Democratic National Committee delegates became more liberal. Republican National Committee delegates became more conservative. The DNC rules were designed to include more women and minority delegates. And the way this works, the Republican Party has a system set up with their delegates that rewards loyalty. So if your state is routinely voting Republican, it helps. It helps you secure delegates. In the Democratic Party, their focus is more on making sure everybody gets represented. Conventions today only ratify primary voters' selections and never actually choose the nominee. Types of party organizations. The machine. The machine uses tangible incentives such as money, jobs, opportunities to get favors from government, and is characterized by a high degree of leadership control over member activity. Examples were Chicago, Philadelphia, and Albany, different periods in history. And this is Tammany Hall, New York, Boss Tweed, if you guys remember him from U.S. history. All right, you love Boss Tweed. Excellent. Yes, he is an example of someone who is a party machine boss. And there aren't a lot of machines still around, but there's an argument that the Chicago machine still kind of exists. Ideological parties place principle above all else. They spurn money incentives. Today they exist as social movements within political parties, such as the Christian Coalition. You could argue the Tea Party is an example of this. Examples of independent third parties, ideological parties that are not subsets of Republicans and Democrats: Socialist Party, Libertarian Party, the Right to Life Party, the Prohibition Party. Solidary groups. People who join political parties for social reasons are part of a solidary group. They join because it's fun. The advantages of such groups is that they are neither corrupt or inflexible. The disadvantage of solidary groups is they don't work very hard. So people who join parties for solidary reasons, they're not going to run you over to gain control over the local precinct or something like that. But they're also not going to put a lot of effort into doing, things that will further the party's goals. Sponsored parties, they're created or sustained by another organization. Example, the Detroit Democrats, which has been developed, led, and financed by the political arm of the United Auto Workers. Personal followings can develop in a party or develop a party. Devotion to a politician and family, work to get the person elected. Example, the Kennedys. You know, we usually have a Kennedy somewhere in Congress. Somewhere. Okay, so let's look at the political spectrum. We kind of got the nuts and bolts, and you really need to know those things, solidarity groups and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of boring, but it's necessary. Now we're going to get into stuff that's probably a little more interesting. This is the political spectrum. This is one graphic to try to explain how this works. On the left, you see communism. On the right, you see fascism. And let's look at the center. That's where the moderates live. And then you see liberal and conservative. And if you look below that, you see Republicans and Democrats. And the argument is that Republicans are moderate to conservative, and Democrats are moderate to liberal. I would argue that they're being a little too nice to both parties. At this point, of late, there's been an increasing encroachment, if you will, expansion of the parties into, at least on the Republican side, a little bit of the Republican Party has moved further right into the reactionary bloc, in my opinion. You may not agree. And there is more movement left for Democrats, which I would suppose would be in that socialist bloc. And I believe, frankly, that two things have a lot to do with that. The internet and cable news. Well, the internet, cable news, and talk radio. You can't forget talk radio. Talk radio has a big thing to do with that. And less moderates than we used to have. We still have a bunch of moderates, but we don't have as many as we used to. And moderates get a lot more verbal abuse from people who aren't moderate nowadays than they had, say, 15, 20 years ago. Declining partisan loyalties. One of the trends in the United States has been fewer people identifying as either Democrat or Republican. And they're not really moving off into third parties. They're just deciding to be that fancy magical thing called independent. Now, I'll leave that up for a second for you to look at. Oh, one thing this is showing is ticket splitting. The number of people who vote for people in different parties when it comes to the presidency and in Congress. That's become, as people have been less apt to identify with a political party, they tend to split their tickets more and vote for more than one party. The two-party system. Very few other countries have a two-party system. It seems to be fairly evenly balanced nationally, but not locally. For example, in our state, almost all of the important elected positions go to one party. Why has the two-party system endured? We have a winner-take-all system and a plurality system. And the winner-take-all system means that whoever gets the most votes, who gets a plurality of the votes, wins the election. State laws make it difficult for minor parties to get on the ballot. In fact, in this state, in the last few years, they have increased the number of signatures it's required on the petition for someone to get on the ballot from a minor party, to make it more difficult for people who aren't Republicans and Democrats to get elected. Minor parties and their impact on American politics. Ideological parties, parties professing a comprehensive view of American society and government that is radically different from that of the two established parties. Most have been Marxist in outlook. That means communist. But some are quite the opposite, such as the Libertarian Party. Examples: the Socialist Party, 1901 to 1960s, Communist Party, 1920s to the present, Libertarian Party, 1972 to the present. Single issue or one issue parties. Parties that seek a single policy, usually revealed by their names, and they avoid other issues. Examples: the Free Soil Party, that was designed to prevent the spread of slavery from 1848 to 1852. The American or Know Nothing Party, that opposed immigration and Catholics, 1856. The Prohibition Party, that wanted to get prohibition going, and it's still around. Check that out, 1869 to the present. Women's Party, to obtain the right to vote for women, 1913 to 1920. Another type of parties is an economic protest party. Parties usually based in a particular region, especially involving farmers, that protest against depressed economic conditions. These tend to disappear as conditions improve. Examples: the Greenback Party, 1876 to 1884, and the Populist Party, 1892 to 1908. Factional parties. Those are parties that are created by split in a major party, usually over the identity and philosophy of the major party's presidential candidate. Examples: a split from the Republican Party, the Bull Moose Party, or Progressive Party. That was Teddy Roosevelt's party because he decided Taft wasn't progressive enough. The La Follette Progressive Party, the split from the Democratic Party. States' Rights Party, the Dixiecrats, in 1948. One of the big issues for the States' Rights or Dixiecrat Party was keeping civil rights movements from happening. So keep that segregation going. Which is why when people scream states' rights, some people look at that and are very suspicious, because states' rights has been used in the past as an argument to maintain things like slavery and segregation. Henry Wallace Progressive Party, 1948. American Independent, George Wallace's party in 1968. And the split from both the Republicans and the Democrats, the Reform Party, Ross Perot's party in the 90s. The effect of third parties on vote distribution. In 8 presidential elections, a non-major party's candidate received more than 10% of the popular vote. In 6 of those elections, the incumbent party lost. As shown here, only in 1856 and 1924 did the incumbent party manage to hold on to the White House in the face of a significant third party showing. So what does it tell us? It tells us that splinter parties or factional parties, these splinter parties, they can be spoilers, usually for the incumbents. So Roosevelt made sure that Taft didn't win. Wilson wins. Look there, Breckinridge, Douglas, Lincoln. So Lincoln won partly because you had Southern Democrats versus Douglas's Democrats. 1856, 1992, 1924, 68, 96, 92, 48. You know, some people argue that the Green Party, which wasn't really a splinter party, but it served as a spoiler in the 2000 election, preventing Al Gore from winning the election. Presidential nominating process. Parties must appease extreme wings during the nominating process, but they need a moderate candidate to win an election. So what happens in the primary process? Candidates talk really strongly in favor of Republican values or really strongly in favor of Democratic values, depending on which party they're in. And then they have to move to the center and make more people like them after they win the nomination from their party. Delegates are not representative voters. Democratic delegates are more liberal. Republicans are more conservative. Republican delegates are more conservative than regular Republicans. Democratic delegates are more liberal than regular Democrats. So, and the delegates are the ones who are voting, right? They're the ones pushing. So that creates this pressure for Democratic candidates to be more liberal in the primary and then try to find a way to get back to the center. Same thing for the Republican candidates. And that means there's always inconsistencies and things the other side can use against the candidate. And what do Republicans always do? They try to paint the Democratic candidate as, you know, secretly ultra-liberal, probably a socialist. I mean, none of us have heard anybody call the current president a socialist, I'm sure. You know, Democrats, what do? They try to make Republican candidates out to be ultra-conservative and dangerously conservative, and that they want to enslave women, you know, and get rid of women's rights completely, that kind of thing. Watch your presidential elections and watch how they spin this stuff. How do presidential and congressional races differ? Presidential races are more competitive than congressional races. In Congress, there are no term limits, and it's tough to run against an incumbent. So presidents, you only can have, at most, half of the presidential elections be an incumbency battle. And being an incumbent president is not quite the advantage that being an incumbent representative or an incumbent senator is. Fewer people vote in non-presidential elections, so congressional races must be appealing to the more motivated partisan voters, which creates more stability and increases the likelihood that you're going to keep your position in Congress. Members can do things for constituents and get credit that presidents can't do. If you're having trouble with your disability forms and getting all that taken care of, you go talk to your Congress person, and then they go and help you work on that. Presidents kind of got bigger fish to fry. Congressional candidates can deny responsibility for the mess in Washington. There are 434 other Congress people, either representatives or senators, so that 1 out of 435 can pretend that they're the one who's not part of the problem. They're fighting the problem. It's all of those other guys that are the problem. The president can't really do that. He can't blame some other president for the problem. And the power of presidential coattails has declined. Running for president. What do you got to do? You got to get mentioned. You got to get noticed. So, let's look at the example of Obama. How did he get noticed? Well, for one thing, he was an African-American senator in Illinois, and that got some buzz. And then he wrote a book. People liked his book. And then the big moment, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah had him on her show a few times, and all of a sudden everybody loved Obama. Well, not everybody, but you get the idea. A lot of people loved Obama, liked him, and that gave him enough word of mouth that he could actually run a campaign and get some support. Getting mentioned is not necessarily that easy. Not everybody has Oprah Winfrey get them mentioned. Reagan spent 6 years working on his campaign, getting prepped and ready. You know, Reagan didn't have that much trouble getting mentioned because he had been on television. He was the voice of Death Valley Days, which was a Western show. He'd been in movies. He was the president of one of the, I can't remember if it's the Screen Actors Guild or the other one. And then he'd been governor of a state for a while. Money. And how much you can give to candidates. The limits have changed, haven't they? Aren't they now $2,000 for individuals? Still $5,000 for political action committees? We need to look into that. Candidates must raise $5,000 in 20 states and individual contributions of $250 or less to qualify for federal matching funds. PAC contributions do not count. So you have to get regular people to give you money in 20 states to be able to qualify for federal matching funds. And what do you need to run for president? You need an organization. You need to have a large staff. Okay. George Stephanopoulos. Anybody watch Good Morning America? In the morning? High school kids don't watch news in the morning. It's not much news. It's mostly entertainment anyway. Okay. Well, he used to be in the staff that helped get Bill Clinton elected. And now he's one of the big guns in ABC News. I'll give you an example of how this works. Running for president continued. Strategy and themes. Incumbents defend their record. Challengers attack their record. So let me give you an example of how this works. What a challenger can do is they can expand a person's record. If you are a Democrat running for an office, you're going to have to defend Obamacare, more than likely. They're going to attach you to that because it was pushed by your party. It's that simple. That gives you an idea of how they work this. Setting a tone, positive or negative. A lot of times campaigns will start kind of positive and the guy who's losing will go negative. Some people have a problem with negative campaigns. Personally, I don't, as long as people are being truthful. The thing I don't like about campaigns is when people lie, whether it's positive or negative. I don't want distortions. I want truth. Develop a theme. You know, Bush 43 was the compassionate conservative. Obama, hope. Target voters. Figure out who you need to vote for you, who you can get. You have a certain number of people who are going to vote for you no matter what because you're in that party. And they've got a certain number of people that are going to vote for them no matter what because they're in that party. The people who will be the swing voters, you have to look at them and you have to figure out demographically which ones you can most likely persuade to your side. So one of the things the Democrats are worried about is it doesn't look like you young folks are going to be voting in the next election. And if young folks nationally don't vote in the next election, that probably means some Democrats are going to lose their seats in Congress. Primary versus general campaigns, different voters, workers, and media attention. Okay, so in the primary, the voters are members of the party, generally. In the general campaign, the voters, just anybody who's registered to vote. The media handles the primary election and the general election a little differently. The primary election is weird, confusing, and can sometimes be kind of a circus. You have debates where there'll be like 5 guys up on stage at once. And someone inevitably says something outlandish and crazy if you watch the debates. There's always 1 or 2 that if you pay attention to primaries, you realize they probably shouldn't be there. And I use the term the wingnut candidate or wacko candidate. So there's always a few fringe candidates. And there's always the guy trying to do something unique and different than anybody's ever done that actually won the election. And they do that, and then they fail miserably, and they disappear. There's kind of a roadmap to victory. And there's certain things you just basically have to do to win. Activists vote in primaries. They're more ideological. You must be conservative or liberal enough to get nominated. Then you run to the center, not from the center. You run to the center to get elected. I understand what he's trying to say with run from the center, but I think it's confusing. The general election campaign, each presidential hopeful must target the campaign. They have to have a strategy to achieve an electoral majority. Take advantage of political assets. Let's get back to that target the campaign. If you are a Democratic candidate running for the presidency, do you spend a lot of time in Oklahoma? There's no point. If you're a Republican candidate, and, you know, let's say, what's a good state? Connecticut? You think? Do you put a lot of time and effort into Connecticut? Probably not. Depends. Connecticut it isn't quite as firm as Oklahoma is. Take advantage of political assets. Incumbency can be an asset if you're a congressperson. In the presidency, I'm not so sure. Develop an image the voter responds to. Attract the support of divergent groups. It's not going to be one group that gets you elected. You got to get a bunch of groups. You got to get a lot of different types of people to like you. That's tough to do. And that's why a lot of times people have that hold your nose vote. In other words, a lot of people vote for the person that they think will do the least amount of damage when they take office from their perspective. A lot of people don't have a candidate. Remember, you only have two realistic choices usually. So generally, there are quite a few people who don't feel either candidate really represents their ideas and what they think should be done. And so they are the hold your nose voters. I happen to be one of those people who's constantly looking at both the candidates and going, wow, which one of these guys do I pick? Use issues and events for their own advantage. Anybody think Benghazi is going to come up in the next presidential election? You know, if anybody who was in the Obama administration is running, and chances are there will be a few, they're going to be they're going to try to tie them to Benghazi. And of course, Obamacare. Take advantage of the media as a primary means of communicating with the public. Work the media. You have to know what you're doing. If you can play the saxophone, maybe you go on a talk show and play the saxophone. Bill Clinton did. All right, the Arsenio Hall Show. All right, so keep that in mind. If you have a special knack for something, don't be afraid to take advantage of it. Use the campaign organization and workers to get the vote out. Labor unions will help you get elected. Chances are if you're a Democrat. Religious groups. Depends on the religious group, which side they might support. Parties aim their campaigns to the middle. Most voters are moderate, and parties direct their appeals to them. Look at that in the middle, 36% moderate. If you will pay attention, you will notice that there are more conservatives than there are liberals. Let's look. Since 1970, what have we had? We've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Republican presidents, and we've had 1, 2, 3 Democratic presidents. Two kinds of campaign issues: position issues and valence issues. A valence issue is one on which voters distinguish rival parties by the degree to which they associate each party or candidate with conditions, goals, or symbols the electorate universally approves or disapproves of. Examples are economic prosperity and political corruption. You can be a corrupt Republican, you can be a corrupt Democrat. So these are valence issues. Things that everybody kind of agrees on as being important, and they're all pretty much on the same side. Not too many people think that bribing politicians is a good idea. Most people think having a healthy economy is a good idea. You know, I think an example of a really kind of weak valence issue is I love America. Candidates who say I love America. As if there are a bunch of candidates who don't love America. But I guess that's kind of what they're implying. I love America more than this other guy does. Or I go to church more than this other guy does. Or I love my wife more than this other guy does. A position issue is one on which the rival parties or candidates reach out for the support of the electorate by taking different positions on a policy question that divides the electorate. Examples: slavery or not to have slavery, high tariffs or low tariffs, Obamacare or no Obamacare. Things like that. Tax cuts for the wealthy or no tax cuts for the wealthy. The impact of television, debates, and direct mail on campaigns. Spots are paid advertising. They can help little-known candidates become known to others. Voters get more information from spots than they do from news broadcasts, which is a sin. You would think news would be news, information that you could use. But no, usually what do? They talk about who's leading. Not what they believe, but who is leading. Visuals, news broadcasts cost candidates nothing. So if you can say something funny or interesting while not politically damaging, you can get yourself on the news. If you are in the party that's not with the president, one great way to get a little bit of a visual on TV is to criticize the president. Debates are usually an advantage only to the challenger. Incumbents or frontrunners run the risk of making a misstatement, a gaffe. People are horribly unfair to politicians who make a statement that is a gaffe, a little bit of an error, and all too often have a simplistic notion, well, that guy said something dumb once on stage in a high-pressure situation. He just must not be very smart, which is incredibly unrealistic, but a lot of people think that way. Direct mail is made easier by computers. These are mailings that are targeted, and they result in donations. You give money to a charity, all of a sudden a bunch of other charities are going after you that are similar. Well, that's not exactly direct mail, because direct mail has to do with candidates, but direct mail will look and figure out what issues are important to you. If you tell somebody electronically what your political issues and beliefs are, you can get targeted mail. Or you can get targeted mail just because of your ethnicity and your age. You know, if a Democratic candidate is trying to argue that his opponent is endangering, let's not damage my books or anything. If welfare, endangering Social Security or Medicare, he's sending targeted mail to 19-year-olds is probably not the way to go. You send that to the older folks. Probably people around, say, 55 and older. Money. Presidential primaries are partly funded with public money, or can be. Presidential general elections, all public money unless the candidate chooses not to accept. Congressional elections are all private money. Actually, presidential general elections have to do with matching funds, right? Dollar to dollar to a maximum of a certain amount. If somebody gives more than, what is it, $200? Then they'll only go up to $200, something like that. A little more complicated than that. And a lot of times lately, candidates have started not accepting matching funds because it puts spending limits on them, and they're able to raise enough money privately that they don't worry about it anymore. That's happened some. Reform following the Watergate scandal, Federal Election Campaign Act, 1974, limits on individual donations, created PACs with limits on their donations. Primary and general elections counted separately for donations. If you know your Citizens United, you know that it was a decision that came out that basically PACs can throw a lot of money into issue ads, which aren't directly about a candidate. Supreme Court ruled in Buckley versus Valeo that limits could not be set on individual spending of money in campaigns of the individuals actually running. If you're running for Congress, you can spend as much money on your campaign as you want to. unless you're receiving matching funds. Soft money is unlimited contributions to party organizations, not candidates. It can only be used for party building, but is really used to promote campaigns. Soft money was banned in 2002, but a 527 group loophole was exploited in 2004 election for groups like MoveOn.org and Swiftboat Veterans for Truth. Advantages of incumbency. It's easier to raise money, raise funds. PACs contribute to incumbents because they get reelected. That makes them a safe bet. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They get more money because they're more likely to get reelected. They're more likely to get reelected because they get more money. They can also provide constituent services and pork, which makes people in their district or their state happy with them. They can use free mailings called the franking privilege, and they can get free publicity, especially if they're not in the party of the president and they go out and say how horrible the president is once in a while. What decides elections? Party identification is most commonly used factor. The issues are usually centered mostly on the economy, and most people vote retrospectively. They vote based on how things are going and have been going. This usually helps incumbents unless the economy is bad. And since there's a lot of negative feelings right now about the state of the economy, it may be difficult for some incumbents more than usual to win. Prospective voting. This is only a few voters do this. They actually try to figure out how they think things will go based on what the candidates say they're going to do and how competent they think those candidates are. It's a more sophisticated way to vote, but it requires research and energy to do effectively. Campaigns make a difference. Often in campaigns they emphasize themes over details, which makes it difficult to be a prospective voter. Primaries have become more important. To win, you have to have a winning coalition. A Democratic candidate has to activate his base, African Americans, Jews, Hispanics not quite as much, but Hispanics, a lot of them seem to be moving that direction because of the issue of immigration. Catholics, unions. Southerners are no longer part of the Democratic coalition for the most part. Republicans rely on business and professional people, farmers, and more Southerners. And what is meant by a realigning election? The issues that separate the parties change, and so the kind of voters supporting each party change. There have been 5 realignments. In 1800, Jeffersonian Republicans defeated the Federalists. In 1828, the Jacksonian Democrats came to power, and the old Democratic Republicans, the Jeffersonian Republicans, kind of faded away. The Whig Party collapsed in 1860, and the Republicans under Lincoln came to power. They became part of the two-party system with the old Jacksonian Democrats versus the Lincoln Republicans. 1896, Republicans defeated William Jennings Bryan, and you suddenly get a more distinctive break where Northern Democrats become Northern Republicans. 1932, Democrats under Franklin Delano Roosevelt came into power because of the perceived failure, I think rightfully so, of the Republican Party's attempt to try to regulate and deal with the Great Depression. Shift of presidential voting patterns in the South. Party alignment among white Southerners has gone from 6-1 Democratic in 1952 to about 50-50 Democrats and Republicans. If the trend continues, it will constitute a major realignment in a region of the country that is growing rapidly in population and political clout. There are some arguments that this trend is probably going to stop, in a sense, maybe even swing back a little, because some of the people moving in from the north are not as conservative. And there's also the issue of demographics. The Hispanic vote is increasing, and it's not really sure who's going to ultimately win the Hispanic vote, Republicans or Democrats.